Hi everyone, I'm Anna Kachikin from the Armenian Report, and I just had an opportunity to interview Gev Iskajyan. He is the representative for ANCA in Armenia. He's an Armenian-American who was forced to leave Artsakh, also known as Nagorno Karabakh. He tells us the story of how he left Artsakh, from Stepanak to Hakkari Bridge in the Lachin corridor, how a 1 hour road took them 40 hours. And he was very limited in the things that he could bring with him, but he chose to bring this one thing. And he tells us what that one thing is that he chose to bring back from Artsakh with him. Let's take a listen. Hi, Gev. It is so good to have you here with me, to see you, to speak to you, to know that you're alive. I know it's a dark, very dark thing to say nowadays, but anyone who escapes, the Azeri threat, any Armenian who escapes the Azeri threat is a blessing. So to see you here, for you to be alive, I'm just so happy to talk to you. How are you?
It's good to be on, Anna. I'm fine, all things considered, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm sure we'll get into it in this interview.
Can you start by telling me what it was like to go from Artsakh to Armenia, just through that Lachin corridor? Can you tell us that story, that journey?
Yeah, speaking to folks on the ground as we were driving through, people were referring to it as the road through hell. Because if you're familiar with, the Lachin corridor from Stepanak to where the Hakkari Bridge is, it's approximately like 45 kilometers. It's not very long, right? However, for us, it took almost 40 hours to get through. That's close to 2 full days of driving through that mountainous range. And I think it's important to keep in mind that, look, for 9 months before that, people were blockaded. They don't have resources, food, essential supplies. And on top of that, we didn't have fuel in the country. So everyone had like a sparse amount of fuel, whatever they can muster up going through that. And as you drive through the road, on the side of the road, you see cars that have broken down, cars that have stopped. You have so many pauses in between, sometimes for 4 or 5 hours at a time where not a single car is moving. You've got, for many families, hungry kids. You've got elderly, you've got people with medical needs that can't be attended to. You have even problems with like water supply and the most basic of necessities. Can you imagine like you're getting into a car and you're like, well, this thing is about naturally without, the conditions that arise. It usually takes us 45 minutes to an hour max to get through. And some folks prepared that way, right? And maybe some thought, okay, it can be longer. Let's say 5 hours, 4 hours. But very few people thought that it would take 40 hours to get through that. And a whole host of problems arise. And at night, through those mountains, it gets incredibly cold. And as you can see, I'm sure online, and I'll help provide you guys with some of those imageries. There's folks that on the side of the road were building fires when the cars were paused just to keep themselves warm. And all of this in the background, all of this in the context of being forcibly displaced from your home.
Did it take you 40 hours?
It took from when we got into our car in Stepanakert to where we got through the Hakkari Bridge, where the Azerbaijani checkpoint is. It took us exactly 40 hours.
Yeah. So once you get to the Hakkari Bridge, who were you with? What were you guys going through? What was your preparation?
So, I took with me a Artsakh family because they needed help with the transportation. For them, it was in two parts. One, there is like all the grief that comes with leaving behind all your belongings, and and your life, your house, everything that you've put your name to. And visualize it this way, Anna. You are told within the matter of a couple of days that the place that you've lived all your life, you no longer can live in. You need to leave. You need to leave. You need to go somewhere where you don't know if you have a job prospects, if you have a house, if you have a place to stay. And on top of that, you're told that everything that matters to you, figure out a way to fit it in a box or two, right? For a family. So they're going through all of those like emotional processes, which is incredibly difficult for them, even more so than myself. Like, they're being uprooted from the only home that they've ever known. So there's that part. But in a sense, you don't know what's going to happen on that road, right? So as you get through, there's also some sense of relief that, like, look, so many families, so many people didn't make it out alive, right? We had the gas tank explosion that took the lives of almost 200 people. And then those 200 people were men that were standing in line to fill up fuel so they can escort their families out. So, the grief that comes with being uprooted and displaced, imagine for those 200 families that are going through all that like difficulty, and then they think the next day they're going to leave and they get a call and it's your husband has died. That I can't imagine. That is a pain so unexplicable that I still have not processed myself.
One of the things that we watch Azerbaijani media propaganda put out there constantly is how they've got journalists at the Lachen corridor interviewing Armenians. They're passing out water and candy and all these things. So when you got there, and then another thing that they're showing is how they're taking the men out of the vehicles. So so we are seeing the propaganda because it's only being covered by Azerbaijani media. There's no Armenian media and there's no international media. So we are only seeing what they're putting out there of what is happening at that border crossing.
Yeah.
What is it truly like?
Yeah. So look, this is the bare reality. Azerbaijan is very well aware of the fact that the second that Armenians cross that border, they're going to be met with international reporters and journalists and all that stuff. All those folks that didn't have access to the Armenians that they were starving for 9 months, to the Armenians that they were cutting off the electricity to for months. They were leaving without, gas and warm heating for almost a year. And you know what? The bare reality is they were trying to be as nice as they can be. That's the literal truth while you go through Hakari Bridge. But that is in the context of someone sending flowers to your funeral after they kill you. And that's how we have to look at it, right? They subjugated these people to unimaginable horror for months and months upon months. They did that in a media vacuum. They didn't let any journalists come in and cover it. So once they got what they wanted, once they ethnically cleansed the population of Artsakh, with open arms, they told you to go and get out to an uncertain future, to a place where you've just left your husband behind, you've left your sons who have died behind. And it didn't serve their interest to be tough with people at the Hakari Bridge, right? But there's also an important side note here. The political prisoners that they did detain at that border needs to be covered. Because what Azerbaijan wants to do is not just ethnically cleanse the population of Artsakh, but they want to kill its heroes, right? Because there's no stronger way to strike at the heart of a nation than to go after all of those people for those months, for those years, for those decades, have fought for Artsakh, have been victorious in battles, former generals in the 90s wars, people that have diasporans that left everything behind and came to fight for the idea of a free and independent Artsakh, like people like Ruben Vartanyan, folks like David Babayan, the former foreign minister who has dedicated the majority of his life for Artsakh, folks like David Manukyan, who was a general who was one of the most humble and well-respected men in the military brass of Artsakh. They targeted all those guys because they didn't just want to ethnically cleanse us. They wanted to make sure that our heroes are wiped away as well.
I want to kind of go a little deeper into Ruben Vartanian as well, but I want to come back to it, okay? I want to talk about the pockets real quick. Um, can you, can, I want to bring a little more human side to the story. Can you describe what was going through your mind that moment right before you approached it and then after you got through Armenia? As an Armenian, just crossing that border,
Yeah.
what was that feeling like for you?
For myself, there was a few complications involved. One, as you know, you may know that I work for our ANC office there, and we don't have access to reporters and journalists. And we, a big chunk of my work is highlighting exactly what's going on in Artsakh, especially through the blockade, especially highlighting Azerbaijan's crimes, and then also talking to foreign legislators throughout the world, from the United States to France, Canada, and beyond, to lobby on behalf of Artsakh. So let's just say, like, my office, myself personally, were not their favorite people. And there were many calls throughout Azerbaijani society to have me detained. So, that thought is always in the back of your mind. But at the same time, you're with folks that you don't want them to, going through all of this, have another concern on the back of their mind. So I tried not to say much. But there is definitely, look, it is this like mixed feeling of, one, relief that you're not detained by Azerbaijani authorities as you're getting through, and then this incredible utter sadness that is, for now, the last time that you will leave a place that you love with your whole soul.
Like you said, you were very vocal on Twitter, on Twitter predominantly, right? That was kind of like your source of communication with the rest of the world when you were in Artsakh during the blockade. And you, like, the last 24, 36 hours, there was complete blackout. Like, we were all checking to hear from you, and there was nothing. Can you tell us what you were doing during that time? What was happening?
So two things. Once Ruben Vartanian was detained, there was the idea that the folks wanted me to leave as soon as possible, because that threat was now very self-evident. On top of that, Azerbaijan now has complete access to the telecommunication lines in Artsakh, which means that if they want to track you, if they want to listen in on your conversations and all that stuff, that's going to be easily accessible, right? So I had no choice but to, go completely dark, turn off my phone, and take some measures that I probably can't talk about here to make sure that we're able to get through.
Now, you mentioned Ruben Vartanian. When Ruben Vartanian was illegally abducted upon crossing, was there dialogue between the two of you? Like, okay, I'm gonna attempt to leave now. Like, was it like, okay, now it's my turn, now I'm leaving? Was there goodbyes?
Unfortunately, there was so much going on in the last 2-3 days in Artsakh. With one, it wasn't just like, okay, you now have to leave. All of that is within the context of, you just had a war. You have 200 plus, almost 300 casualties from that alone. You've got all these bodies to bury, which in itself is a process. You've got families that don't know whether they can take the bodies of their, sons and fathers and brothers with them. That in itself is a crisis catastrophe. On top of that, you had the fuel tank explosion, and you had a lack of doctors, lack of medicine. That in itself is a crisis catastrophe. So the state of affairs throughout Artsakh was in an incredible disarray. There were people trying to do their best, but we were cut off from the rest of the world. We're being displaced. We just went through a war, and we just went through a terrible, terrible incident, the fuel tank explosion. All of this within a matter of like 3-4 days. So everyone in their own respective fields and what they do, we were all honed in on that, because you have a responsibility to the people, right? No matter how bad things get, you have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to be able to, shut off a part of your mind so that you can effectively work, so that you can effectively serve your people. So in those last few days, that type of communication wasn't necessarily there, but we were all aware of the fact that this was a present danger, right? Every single person going through that bridge, those that were abducted and essentially kidnapped, those that were able to make it out, everyone was very well aware of what could happen. And Rupen, I throughout the last year, I got to know him well. He appeared on our podcast. I've done a few interviews with him. His office, they've got incredible staff, incredible people, and Rupen represents a lot of what Azerbaijan is most scared of, which is the collective strength of the Armenian nation. I don't just mean Armenia itself. I mean the Armenian nation, the diaspora, with the homeland together. And they wanted him kidnapped, detained, abducted, illegally arrested for that reason. They want to have a psychological impact. It's not just about detaining Ruben. It's what they're trying to say.
Now, one thing that I want to make very clear to people with my next question is that Stepanak was like, I've never been, but you confirm what I'm saying. It's like a metropolitan city.
It's beautiful. It's the capital of Artsakh. It is where the vast majority of the population definitely lives. So if you got 180,000, 120,000 people in Artsakh, close to like 75,000 of them, upwards of 80,000 of them are living in Stepanak. Yes.
In a matter of what, the attack happened on September 19. The mass exodus started September 24.
Around that time frame,
right?
everything's.
So imagine a country that has existed, has been built, crumbles within hours, right? Now you're Armenian American, you don't live there, but you were there for what, 2 years? Yeah. So it's not, I'm sure you didn't need to pack much, but
yeah.
What happens to all those documents and everything just were, I saw people were burning it. People can't imagine or wrap their head around all the little things that go. We're not talking about someone's house, someone's family. We're talking about an entire country.
Yeah.
Just,
it's difficult. It's difficult to leave behind so much. It's also dangerous to leave behind so much. People have all their personal documents, their family stories, and a lot of other various things that you don't want to be in Azerbaijan's hands. They don't deserve the right to have access to that information of your life. So folks burn that. I myself just literally grabbed a backpack of clothes that I would need for the next day or two, partly because I was taking people with me, people that I knew who were being uprooted from their homes. So I wanted them to have as much space in the car as possible. The only other thing that I took with me was one of the khachkars in Artsakh, because I know what's going to happen to them. We've seen what's happened to them in the occupied territories after the 2020 war, which is complete destruction. They will break it, they will desecrate it, and in those khachkars and so many more were left behind, unfortunately, because how can you take all your shrines? How can you take all your monuments? How can you take all of your cultural history? But it was important for me to take something that they can't desecrate, something they can live on.
Do you have it with you in there right now?
Yes,
Can you show us?
it's massive, and
Oh,
I mean,
it's
by massive, it's a rock khachkar.
it's a
It's
big
the
thing.
ones that,
I thought
yeah, no,
okay.
it's quite large.
Where did you store that? On top of the car?
So, luckily I have an SUV with me. So, where the spare tire is supposed to go, under the trunk, we took the spare tire out, and thank God we didn't end up needing a spare tire. And we put the khachkar there, and then we put stuff over it, and then the family was able to pack their stuff on top of it. And we also wanted to make sure that it's, enclosed and protected, so that when we got to Akari Bridge, they actually make you get out of the car, open it up, and check it, just in case that they would take something like that. We wanted to make sure it was protected.
Do you know have you heard any word about removing Mamik and Papik from Stepanakert? I know there were some talks and petitions going on about that.
Look, we won't know what the Azerbaijani regime's plans are. There's two routes they can take. The one route is keeping those very obvious cultural monuments intact. So the things that you can pull with satellite imagery, so that they can say, hey, look, we care about the people that we just essentially committed genocide towards, and propagate that. And two, they might leave, certain things that we can associate, like Mamik and Babik, with Artsakh intact, and destroy everything else, right? And we've seen things like that happen in Shushi, where they came in and apparently they're reconstructing Gazanjanod's, the monastery, the church in the famous church in Shushi, but we don't know what's going on inside there. And also Armenians have no access to it. And also they blew up the dome. So it's a very uncertain state, and it's something that needs to be monitored, not just by Armenians, but also, international organizations that are like UNESCO heritage sites and other things that are supposed to keep track of this.
Did you towards the end after the 19th, did you see Azerbaijanis walking around Stepanakert? Are they just roaming? Are they amongst the
In the
Armenians?
last, so in the last 2-3 days, there are confirmed videos and sightings of Azerbaijani police within Stepanakert. Before that, during the war, they were essentially on the outskirts. So, where I was staying in Stepanakert, if I drove literally 5 minutes up, there were Azerbaijani troops stationed there. So while they might, during the war not have entered directly into the city, you can accidentally wander by walking just a little too far, and meet yourself with Azerbaijani troops.
So there were 120, approximately estimated 120,000 Armenians living in Artsakh as of
Mhm.
September 19,
Mhm.
2023. Um, Now, last number that I saw, it was about 93,000 Armenians who had
Mhm.
uh, evacuated from
Yeah.
their indigenous homeland, um, because of the ethnic cleansing that Azerbaijan is committing.
Mhm.
Now, the question is, do you think that there will be any Armenians who end up staying? And who
So,
are those Armenians?
when you're talking about a population size of like 120,000 people, there are going to be folks that stay. And unfortunately, many of them are going to be uh, elderly folks who refuse to go, not because they want to live in a state controlled by Azerbaijan, but because they're like, this was my great grandparents' home, this was my grandparents' home, this was my parents' home, this is my home, this is where my kids lived and my grandkids lived. I refuse to leave, and I know I may die, but let it be here. And that will be the majority of the people that stay. However, that number is minuscule. If you were to ask me to estimate how many folks that I think would stay in Artsakh, I would say less than 1,000. And you're talking about 99% of your population, more than 99% of your population ethnically cleansed.
Why do you think Armenians in Artsakh are just flooding out of there? Why are they
Because
so
you
afraid
can't,
of living there?
people say when I speak to like international reporters and outlets, they ask that same question. They're like, what do you guys think is going to happen? And I say it's not about what do we think is going to happen, it's knowing what has already happened. We know what's happened in Baku and Sumgait, right? Those people were massacred and driven out of their homes. And if we don't want to go back that far in history, look at Shushi and Hadrut. How many Armenians live there? And the ones that did live there, when Azerbaijan came in and occupied their territories, what did they do, Anna? They like beheaded these folks, right? The few folks that remained. Why would Armenians play Russian roulette with their lives? Why would they take a chance on a regime that they know has massacred their people? Why would they take a chance on a regime that 3 years ago completely depopulated areas like Shushi and Hadrut, and not by very nice means either, through torture and absolute brutality?
You said the word chance. Do you think that Armenians stood a chance at this ethnic cleansing, at this war against Azerbaijan? Did we stand a chance against their occupation of our indigenous lands?
Anna will never know, because when we're talking about did Armenians stand a chance, we don't know, because the Armenian government did nothing. It was the small Republic of Artsakh, after a year of blockade, after receiving no type of military aid, after having the Armenian troops withdrawn from Artsakh, fighting against a massively scaled army of Azerbaijan. So did we have a chance? I think we would have had a chance if we weren't left alone. I think, look, the blockade, it's really important to thematically connect everything that happened in the last week to that, because the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh didn't start 5 days ago. It started when they tried to choke us out. It started when they tried to starve us. It started when they tried to cut off our electricity and do all these things. And you know what? For 280 plus days, the people of Artsakh didn't give in to a single concession. After going through all of that, after not having food to eat for days and not turn their lights on, their resilience is incredible, and it cannot go understated. And Azerbaijan saw that. What they wanted to do is they wanted Artsakhis to integrate by subjugating them to the horrors of a blockade. And when they saw that the Artsakhis were too strong for that, they started a massive military operation.
Now you're back in Armenia, and you are back and forth between Yerevan and Godis. I've seen many photos and videos of you and Godis helping and supporting. And I've heard few people say that the situation when you're physically there in Godis and in Sunik, where the people are coming over from Artsakh into Armenia, it's worse than what it seems. Most of the people watching this are going to be people who weren't in Sunik or weren't even in Armenia. Can you kind of describe to us what it's like being there?
You have all of these folks coming in, and the biggest question is, where do I go? What do I do? Right? Those are the first two things on anyone's mind. Nobody had time to organize getting a job in Armenia in 3-4 days, getting a house, knowing if they can afford a house, knowing if they can do those things without a job, without bringing over any of their possessions. So what happens to me and what do I do are you can see that if those questions were an expression You can see it on people's faces, right? And then there's obviously immediate needs that need to be met. Like you have a bunch of people coming over, and again, this is where I tie it to the blockade. People that were malnourished for months, and on top of that, like driving through Lachin for 40 hours or more at times, that takes an incredible physical toll on somebody. And then you have like a bunch of kids who have certain needs that need to be met. You have the psychological condition of everyone, which is none of it is good, right? But you also there are things that you see there that give you certain hope. The vast majority of volunteers I saw were kids, like the kids of Goris. I saw a bunch of diasporan youth. I saw folks from Yerevan that drove up. I saw organizations big to small that were there, meeting these people, helping these people, giving them water, whatever, shelter, clothes, whatever they can provide at that moment. What I didn't see much of was any presence of the Armenian government.
Is it enough, or what is lacking as far as the crisis goes, and supporting this crisis? What is not being done enough of?
So two things. Like, look, we've got incredible orgs like the ARS, Armenian Relief Society, was on the ground. Folks from All for Armenia were on the ground. I know, diasporan orgs like Hike for Our Heroes that are fundraising today in the diaspora, organizations like the Armenian Youth Federation that are collecting funds and doing these certain things. But the scale of what needs to be done is massive, and it's a scale that needs foreign aid. We're not talking about collecting, just tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that is needed to build housing for folks, to provide job training and job placement for folks, to provide adequate medical care. To one thing that I think is incredibly important is to keep these communities together, right? If folks from Marduni are leaving to go somewhere, I want them to live next to each other. I don't want them to be dispersed, because that alleviates so many of the psychological and socioeconomic factors that come into it. It's leaving your homeland is a devastating heartbreak that I wouldn't want to wish upon anybody. But if you can somehow maintain the communities that you had, if you can live next to your neighbors once again, I think that is something that can really help alleviate a lot of the trauma that people went through. But to do that, you need proper funding. You need large-scale foreign funding. We need the United States, the EU. The United States allocated like $11 million. They throw around that money like it's chump change. It does not matter to them. They can do so much more. And we need to make sure it's allocated and spent the right way by the Armenian government.
You said something that I didn't even cross my mind, which brings me to my next question, which is, you said keeping the communities together. So like the Marduni province, together, the Stepanak community together. So wherever they live together in Artsakh, keep those people together. So for psychological reasons. 100%. I that didn't even cross my mind, because in my mind, my next question to you was going to be, where do you think these people are going to just disperse all over the world? Because you and I are diaspora, right? We've dispersed for whatever reason. Our families left for whatever reason in the past. And so then we're seeing that happen now as adults to another generation of Armenians, right? And so you're probably looking at this and thinking, no, they can't leave, they need to stay. And not only do they need to stay, but they should stay as neighbors, right? So you're even like you're being even more precise as far as like not, but is that really going to be possible given what you said?
I can't tell these folks what they need to do. Neither can I, neither can the Armenian government, neither can the diaspora, because we've all in a certain way failed them to a certain extent. So they will make that decision. However, what we can do, what we can work tirelessly to do, what they deserve at most, is the chance to live a good life in Armenia with their communities. But there's also problems that you run into here. So, for example, there's Yerevan is already incredibly overcrowded. It's with the influx of all the tourists here and all the people that, in the last 2 years from the Ukraine-Russia war that have come into, rent prices here have skyrocketed. The average Artsakh cannot afford it. In fact, the average Yerevanci couldn't afford Yerevan apartment prices or housing prices. So then that brings you to the question, where do we have space, right? And the answer is Sunik. And then when you propose that to an Artsakh, and you're like, look, I know in 2020 you went through a war, you were essentially displaced, then you came back to give it another shot. And then 3 years later, you went through a war, you were displaced. And now we are going to send you to a region that is most likely to face the next war. That is an incredibly difficult proposal to give to somebody that's been uprooted. So, we have to make sure Armenia is a place that is safe. Armenia is a place that is well guarded. Armenia is a place with competent military leadership, where these people can go to any region in Armenia and don't need to feel like they're going to be ethnically cleansed again. And it's a really, it's a very, very complex issue, Anna. I don't know where these folks are going to want to go, but I know that the answer is somewhere towards keeping these communities together, where we can find space and where they can feel safe.
Brings me to my last question, then I'll open it up to you if I missed anything. Last question for you is, what's next for the entire Armenian nation? I ask this question often, and I think it's in the back of everyone's mind, which is, do we need to recover, mourn, grieve, go through all the steps of grieving and get to a place where we say, okay, we need to work towards bringing Artsakh back? Or are we doing all of this to grieve and rebuild and hold on to Sunik and Gerarkunik and hold on to Armenia? Like, what is our long-term goal? And I hope that this will be a huge, great awakening for the next Armenian Nujda, Monte, whatever, the great, there's some great leader who's going to emerge from this and tell us what's next.
The first step is realizing what you've lost. I think that's incredibly important. We lost for diasporans to visualize this, a place where Armenians lived for 2,000 years, they no longer live in. That is a heavy, heavy reality that we need to understand. We lost a landmass from 2020 till today, the size of the entire country of Lebanon. That is something that we have to come to the understanding of. And maybe folks in Yerevan might not feel it. Maybe folks in LA might not feel it. Maybe folks in Moscow might not feel it because it's you weren't asked to pack your bags and you didn't hear the bombs fall in Stepanak and your loved ones didn't die in the last 10, 15 days, but those were all our brothers. Those were all our family members. And we have to accept them with open arms, and we have to treat them as such. So we have to, one, realize what happened. Moving forward, this whole Menkazorenk, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all that stuff, that's great. But first, realize what happened. It is an incredibly heavy loss. No platitudes, no slogans, no words can encapsulate what just happened to our nation. 2, understand what it takes to prevent that. That means a nation with a strong military, a nation with very, very good diplomacy, especially where we're situated amongst world powers and people that want to carve away at our homeland, and a nation with good leadership. However, the notion that we need to wait for the next Najde or Monte or next Messiah or Savior, that is one I don't believe in. I think we have to, each and every single one of us, whatever the change is that we want to see in the diaspora and in Armenia, it starts with ourselves, right? Waiting for somebody, some populist to come and get us out of this mess. No one can do that. No single individual can do that. We have to change the way we think, that would change the way we feel, and most importantly, we have to change the way that we act. We have to know that there is, and this is something that I used to say, and it breaks my heart now looking back on it. Every time I would talk on a live, or I would go on and speak to Armenians around the world, I would say this. I was like, if you guys think Artsakh is just going to exist because it's going to exist, because that's what's in our mind, that's not the case. There is a chance that we lose it for now, for the time being. There's a chance that we get uprooted. There's a chance that Artsakh is not Armenian, and we have to get that through our heads. And I said that not to be a pessimist, but I said that to know that if the road that we're going down is apathy, that road leads to the end of it. It currently led to the end of Artsakh, and it will lead to the end of Armenia. If we move on like we aren't situated between neighbors that want to wipe us off the earth, that we don't need to do more, we will lose Armenia as we have Artsakh.